I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that I actually changed my direct deposit account. I was getting anxious because it was payday, but no paycheck had been deposited. It turns out that my husband changed the direct deposit account without my consent. That being said, my husband's salary is small to begin with, and I'm the one covering most of the living expenses. It seems like he should realize that life would become more difficult without his salary. I'm angry with him for forgetting to tell me such an important thing. After asking him why he changed the direct deposit account, I decided to end my marriage to this man. I'm Lily, 31 years old, and a working housewife. I live in an apartment with my husband David, who's 5 years older than me at 36. We met at a mixer, and at the time I thought David looked mature and would protect me if we got married. So we started dating. It was my mistake to choose him based on my imagination, but he's so devious that he kept this secret from me until we got married. David can't control his desires. If he sees a watch he likes, he'll buy it right away, even if it costs $2,000. He always says, "I'm a man who can adapt quickly to the new age," so he hasn't paid in cash for the past 10 years. He rarely carries cash, and all payments are made by credit card. He's been living like this, constantly chased by payments. Seeing him pay with a credit card used to make me think he was cool and mature. I wish I could go back in time and slap myself. When we got married, David and I decided to manage our money by consolidating our salaries into a single joint account. We thought about giving him an allowance, but David only wanted to use a credit card, so we decided to limit his allowance to $250 per month. However, when I checked our cash flow, it became clear we couldn't even spend that much. The payment amount on David's credit card was $800 every month. He was using revolving credit with a monthly fixed payment of $800. Our monthly income is $1,300 from David and $2,400 from me. Considering our $800 monthly expenditure, life gets a bit tough. I was too afraid to splurge, yet David keeps spending lavishly with his credit card. As a newlywed, I was shocked to discover that David's take-home pay was lower than what a fresh graduate at my company earns. Before we got married, he claimed to work at a fairly large company, and I took his word for it. He wasn't lying about the company, but he was working part-time at a restaurant run by this large corporation. It was a high-end restaurant, and David was always in a suit, serving customers. When we met after work, he was in a cool suit, which completely fooled me. It's unbelievable that someone like him has a credit card limit of $5,000, which should be decreased. Nothing in this world makes sense. For our wedding, my parents gave us money, and until we got married, we never discussed finances, so I didn't know that David had so little money. It's too late to regret not discussing money before marriage. If I'd known this would happen, I wish I'd asked to see his pay slips. About 6 months after we got married, my mother-in-law Margaret showed up at our house unannounced. It was a holiday, but David usually works weekends and holidays, so I greeted her alone. My in-laws are pretty well off. My father-in-law runs a company, and it seems my brother-in-law is being trained to take over. Meanwhile, David is free to live his own life. Margaret dotes on David and continues to spoil him, even as an adult. Margaret looked around our apartment with disdain and commented, "What a shabby place! It's not right for David to live in such a cheap apartment. What were you thinking, Lily?" I had planned to move to a larger, nicer place after getting married, but circumstances changed. I wanted to say it was because of her son, but I held back with a forced smile. The apartment we live in now is the one I had before we got married, and David just moved in with me. We had once decided on a new place after an apartment tour, and I asked David to handle the contract. However, for some reason, he didn't follow through. I had already arranged to cancel our current lease, but during our honeymoon, I found out the new apartment wasn't contracted, so after we returned, I quickly re-signed the lease for our current place. I suspect the reason he didn't sign the new lease was due to financial issues, but Margaret wouldn't understand. David is her whole world, so our current living situation is unacceptable to her. Margaret often muttered, "I can't understand why my son married such a penniless woman," as if talking to herself. Her attitude really got under my skin. I finally snapped and said, "Well, if David made a good salary, we'd be living in a nice apartment by now, wouldn't we?" Margaret bristled. "What do you mean by that? Are you implying it's David's fault? You can't meddle in your husband's salary just because you got married. I won't give you a dime of our inheritance." I replied, "Luckily, I make enough to live on my own. I didn't marry David for money. I married him because I love him. Your inheritance has nothing to do with me." My strong tone seemed to annoy her further, and she glared at me. "You say that, but I wonder what the truth is. Anyway, don't rely too much on David. He's delicate. I can't bear the thought of him being henpecked," she spat out before storming off. She'd clearly come to see David and had no interest in talking to me. After she left, I thought back on what I said. I told her I married David because I loved him, but now I'm not so sure. After all the lies surfaced, the dependability I once saw in David vanished. He's reckless with money and overestimates his abilities. It's painful to watch. What I once found cool about him now seems incredibly lame. Despite these feelings, can I still say I love him? Then, a year into our marriage, something happened. David's salary stopped being deposited into our joint account. Could he have quit his part-time job and is hiding it? Where does he go every day? I started to worry and confronted him when he came home. "David, where have you been?" I asked. "Where? Well, at work," he replied. "But our joint account hasn't received your salary. Did you quit your job?" I pressed. He looked confused and then started laughing. "Sorry, I forgot to mention, I've changed my direct deposit account," he said. I asked, "Changed it? What do you mean?" He explained, "I've decided to stop paying with my credit card." I was baffled. "What do you mean?" I pressed on. He continued, "I realised that if I keep using my credit card, my dad will actually increase the payments, not decrease them. Given the interest, it seems wasteful. You can keep paying the credit card, and once it's paid off, there won't be any interest." Honestly, I felt like screaming, "What are you talking about?" He was really getting on my nerves. "What good does this do for me?" I asked. He replied, "Well, you won't have to pay $800 every month once the payment is done." "Wait, that's your debt you're talking about. You need to face the music. I can only spend $300 a month. I can't live on that." "Thanks in advance for your help," I said, though it was clear I was frustrated. David either didn't notice or just didn't care, as he quickly left the house. Why did I marry such a loser? I thought. Everything seemed like a mistake. I was so fed up that I decided to file for divorce right away. But I still didn't fully understand the process. I filled out my section of the divorce papers and asked David for a divorce. He refused. "Lily, you can't just get a divorce like that. We need to discuss it. Besides, if I don't agree, it's not going to happen. There's also mediation, but that means going to court, which takes time," he explained. He acted as if a divorce was impossible. I knew why David didn't want to divorce me. He didn't want to lose his cash cow. As long as he stayed with me, he could use his entire salary as his own allowance. He probably thought it was more convenient to be supported by me, but it was nothing but a burden for me. Not only did he not contribute financially, but he also didn't help with household chores like cleaning or laundry. It felt absurd that I couldn't just divorce him easily. Did I really have to live with this person for the rest of my life? Overwhelmed and despairing, I kept myself busy with work and house chores. When was the last time I spent money on myself? Before marriage, I had many hobbies and enjoyed life. But now, it seemed I was doomed to be David's cash cow forever. He always seemed carefree, and just seeing his face made me uncomfortable. I started avoiding him and keeping my distance. 6 months after I first mentioned divorce, my mother-in-law, Margaret, showed up at our apartment. It was a holiday, but David happened to be home. I was working from home on my day off and planned to just say hello before going back to my tasks. But as soon as I appeared, Margaret pointed at me and shouted, "What are you up to? What do you think you're doing with my David?" I was stunned. She accused me of criticizing David, saying, "You only earn $1,300 a month and have the nerve to criticize David, who makes $3,000 a month." I looked at David, who was avoiding my gaze, clearly flustered. It was clear he'd been complaining about me to his mother, just as he had lied to me before our marriage. Margaret kept complaining, trying to defend David. "Your job is in March compared to David's. You're said to be living a luxurious life alone without giving him an allowance." Luxurious life alone? I thought. David had his finger on his lips, signalling me to stay quiet, and he seemed to be on the verge of tears. Clearly he hadn't expected his mother to confront us after his exaggerated complaints. Margaret accused me of taking advantage of David's kindness. "That's the worst," she said, glaring at David. David, seemingly with no choice but to side with his mother, told me, "That's right, just get out." He made an apologetic gesture behind Margaret's back as she glared at me. I nodded and said, "I see, I understand. I guess a woman like me wasn't right for David. I'm sorry, I'll leave right away." "Oh, good, you understand," Margaret said. "But it's fine. I just wanted you to change your attitude toward David. You don't have to leave." "Is that so? Then I'll change my attitude," I replied. "But from now on, I'll be watching to make sure you don't mistreat him again." Feeling satisfied, Margaret left with a cheerful attitude, but I was left with a heavy sense of emptiness and sadness. I had been sacrificing myself to pay off David's debts. Why did I have to feel this way? Tears welled up in my eyes. Noticing my distress, David started to panic. "Lily, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "Does it look like I'm okay to you, David?" I snapped back. "I mean, sorry, I guess I exaggerated too much, or my mum misunderstood. If we show her we're getting along, she'll be reassured. Let's go together and show her." "I have some work left to do, so I'll get back to it," I said, retreating to my room. I opened my laptop and began researching law firms. Work seemed secondary now. I explained my situation online and sought advice on what to do next. I received various suggestions I hadn't considered before. I should have acted like this from the start. I couldn't help but blame myself for not divorcing sooner and enduring harsh words from my mother-in-law. But I couldn't dwell on regrets. I needed to focus on the future and never be under David's control again. Determined, I began preparing for the divorce. I lived my usual peaceful life, hiding my anger and my plans from David. When he wasn't around, I requested a quote from a moving company. I had already picked out my new place. I had been saving to marry, but now I didn't need to live in that cheap apartment anymore. By increasing my rent by about $180, I found many better options. Since I wasn't thinking about remarrying anytime soon, I chose a pet-friendly apartment. Living with a pet would be more comforting than living with David. Finally, moving day arrived. I had already sent smaller items to my new home, so the movers were only needed for the heavy furniture and appliances. I was completely fed up with David, who hadn't even noticed most of my things were gone. As I was busy with the move, David asked, "You seem busy. Is something wrong?" "Well, I'm thinking about moving," I said. "I haven't heard anything about this," he replied. "Of course, I didn't tell you," I said. "But you don't need to worry. I'm the only one moving out. You need to find a new place soon. I signed the lease for this apartment, so I've cancelled it." David finally understood the situation and clung to me. "Lily, I'm sorry. It's because I lied to my mum. Right? I won't lie again. Please forgive me." "This isn't about forgiveness," I said. "You always put your debts on me, lied about working for a big corporation, and deceived your mother, blaming it all on me. There's nothing good about being married to you, David. I can't stand it anymore. I'm getting a divorce. I'll have my lawyer contact you later." David stood there panicked and speechless, then suddenly started making calls. I wondered what he hoped to achieve. Consulting with someone now wouldn't change anything. About 10 minutes later, his mother arrived. Seeing the movers carrying out my belongings, she looked shocked. "Lily, who are these people? What's going on?" she demanded. I didn't feel like explaining, especially since it was clear David hadn't told her the truth. It would be a waste of time to explain everything. "I'm getting a divorce from your son and leaving this house," I said. "Ask David for more details about his job, his salary, his debt. After you find out everything, I expect an apology." Margaret tried to deflect, saying, "You're trying to blame David when it's all your fault. I was ready to forgive you if you apologized and changed your attitude." I ignored her completely. The movers finished their job, leaving only David's stuff behind. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. "You better leave by the end of this month," I said to David with disgust, and walked out. As I started my car and began to drive away, David and his mother chased after me. Of course they couldn't keep up with a car. They stumbled and fell, their feet tangling in a comic display. I couldn't help but laugh. It was so satisfying to see them running clumsily, knowing they couldn't catch up. It had been a while since I laughed this hard. From now on, I decided to live for myself. Later, David apparently told his mother the truth, and she called to apologize. "I'm really sorry for what I've done," she said. "I didn't listen to you properly. Could you give me your new address so I can apologize in person?" "I should have told you the truth sooner," she admitted. "But I don't want you to know my address, so I can't give it to you." She added, "If you had told me about David sooner, this might not have happened." "I didn't think it would help. You would just call David and try to make peace," I said. Unable to tolerate my defiance, Margaret changed her tone. "How dare you? Don't get too cocky just because I'm being a bit humble. Did you just call to vent your frustration?" I decided there was no need for further discussion. "It's a waste of time," I said, and hung up the phone, blocking her number. Later I consulted my lawyer and successfully divorced David. The court granted the divorce on the grounds of David's faults, such as not covering living expenses and forcing me to pay his credit card bills. I received all our marital assets. Although David was initially entitled to a share, his father, furious upon learning of David's behavior, ordered that all the trouble David caused should be paid to me. Additionally, his father transferred the revolving payments I'd been making for David. I was surprised and grateful, as I thought I couldn't claim the revolving part since it was shared property. Margaret, who had always favoured David and tried to suppress me, was also reprimanded by her husband. After he told her to live with David, she moved into a run-down apartment similar to the one I used to live in. She eventually understood my hardship and called me from a public phone, crying and apologising. But I wasn't ready to forgive her. She should experience living with David for a while. As for David, it seems he exceeded his credit card limit and was banned from using it by his mother. His entire salary is now managed by her, and he's on an $80 monthly allowance. Despite this, he couldn't break his spending habits and borrowed money from a consumer finance company, sinking deeper into debt. Margaret is reportedly close to giving up on him too. I can't help but feel sorry for the people lending him money. As for me, I moved to a pet-friendly apartment and adopted a cute dog. The dog listens well and enjoys our walks, which is also good exercise for me. It feels like I've gained a new family member, and my life has become richer. My parents visit to see the dog, and I've made new friends through him. My everyday life is so much happier now than it was when I was married to David. For now, I plan to continue enjoying these peaceful, joyful days,